Well, we're following breaking news out of Texas where a hot air balloon caught on fire and crashed this morning. The balloon went down near Lockhart, Texas, which is about 30 miles or so from Austin. Officials say at least 16 people were on board and no one survived. I'm joined on the phone by CBS News transportation safety analyst Mark Rosenker. Mark, talk to us now. It's a hot air balloon. This isn't something, in my understanding, that's regulated by government officials, is it?
Well, the FAA does have rules and regulations concerning hot air balloons. You do have to have a certificate to be able to operate one of these. But again, they're clearly not as much oversight on them as we would have with fixed wing or rotorcraft.
Well, obviously someone will be looking into this, Mark, as an investigation. So how do you determine the investigation? What are the steps that are taken?
Well, since this is an aviation accident, and according to congressional legislation, the FAA and the NTSB will be involved. The NTSB will be leading this investigation. They'll be sending a team of competent investigators to the site to begin documentation and the investigation. They will be looking for a number of things. They'll do a 72-hour history on the pilot. They'll also be looking at the remains of the aircraft itself. They'll be doing any examination of any potential maintenance records that may have occurred with this device. But again, this is one of the worst hot air balloon accidents I believe we've seen, particularly a single accident involving potentially as many as 16 fatalities.
When you heard that there could be as many as 16 fatalities, what went through your mind? This is a hot air balloon.
This is extraordinary to have a device that went down with this many people. Lots of questions are going to have to be asked, lots of answers required before the investigation will be able to determine what happened. For
anyone who takes their family or enjoys going up on hot air balloons, what are some things you need to keep in mind, Mark, when you do that?
Well, again, anytime you're doing something like this, you want to make sure you're doing it with competent competent pilots, competent maintainers, and also clearly you're hoping and trying to validate as well as you possibly can that the devices themselves are airworthy.
I want to remind folks the images you're seeing now are not of the actual hot air balloon that went down. It's just footage that we have of various hot air balloons. Mark, I want to ask you before you go, when the investigation begins with the FAA and the NTSB, you were telling us a little bit about what they're looking into, but what do you think ultimately, I know you're not on the ground, but what do you think ultimately they might be able to determine once this investigation begins?
Well, certainly they're going to be looking at everything and anything that had to do with this device. They'll be looking at weather. They'll be looking at any type of maintenance history. They'll want to know the certification and the competency of the pilot. They'll also be looking for any potential obstacles that this device may have struck. Too many questions that need to be answered before they will have a good idea of exactly what happened. This will be a meticulous, methodical investigation, and they will ultimately learn what happened and then, of course, make recommendations to prevent it from happening again.
Mark, we're hearing that the cause of this accident may have likely been the fire in the basket of the hot air balloon. Can you just sort of explain to us what that might have been?
Well, these are powered by gas, and of course, the more gas and heat you get, the balloon goes higher. The colder that the balloon gets, it then comes down. So these are operated. They'll be trying to find any type of evidence that may well have survived to try to understand if this device had been overheated, or in fact something may have caught fire, which then had the fire spread to where, in fact, the balloon itself caught fire.
Mark, if you can hang on with us just a second, I want to also bring in by phone hot air balloon pilot Danny Stone. Danny, thank you for joining us. Mark was talking about the potential of possibly this catching fire. When you heard about this, that potentially 16 people might be dead over this hot air balloon crash, what went through your mind?
Well, it's a tragic loss. I think the thing we got to look at is how big these balloons are getting these days. When I first started flying, balloons took 2 or 3 people in them. Now they're becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. The bigger the balloon, the harder it is to fly the balloon. You know, it has less response time. If you see power lines, you have less response time to climb over the power lines. In my opinion, the balloons are just getting too big.
16 people, Danny. Isn't that a lot of people for one hot air balloon?
that's a lot of people. I would never fly a balloon with 16 people in it, and I've been flying since 1974. They're
Why
too
wouldn't
hard
you
to
fly?
fly. They're too hard to fly. They're just too hard to maneuver. They're way too hard to maneuver the balloon.
And what do you
When you apply heat to a balloon that big, it takes a longer response time than you apply heat to a small balloon. So if you see power lines in front of you and you're going to try to climb over them, your response time is going to be a lot greater in trying to climb over a power lines in a big balloon like that than a small balloon.
All we know right now, Danny, is that somehow there was a fire there. The basket caught on fire, apparently. What do you make when you hear that this is possibly what may have happened? What do you think?
I think it hit power lines.
You think it hit power lines?
Because the balloons just don't catch on fire on their own. I mean, that would be pretty unusual. When you hit a power line, you're going to catch on fire. So not knowing, I just heard about this about 10 minutes ago. Not knowing exactly what happened.
Yeah.
My guess is it flew into power lines.
Right, and you're not, I just want to stress, you're not on the ground, but you're just based on what you're hearing about the details that you think that maybe it could have caught on power lines. When people get into these hot air balloons, Danny, what are some things they should keep in mind that you would say, if you're seeing this, don't ever get inside that hot air balloon?
Well, one thing I would tell anybody, don't get in a balloon with 16 people in it. Get in a balloon, 4 or 5 people in it. They're a lot easier to fly. 16 people, those are way too hard to fly. And that's where you're seeing all the accidents coming these days, like over in Turkey and a few places, other places. There are always these big balloons that seem to be getting into these accidents. The smaller balloons, no. When I first started flying balloons, we never had accidents. They're a lot easier to fly. They're more maneuverable. You can land in smaller fields. A big balloon's going to require a big takeoff area. It's going to require a big field to land in. It's going to have less response time. You're climbing over power lines. For myself, I would never fly a balloon that big.
If you are in a balloon and you realize it's going down or it's in danger, is there anything you can do? It's not like people are wearing, any sort of preventive gear when you get into hot air balloons. No,
if you're going down, you apply the heat and try to go back up, and you see an obstacle in front of you. If you.
I'm sorry, Bobby. I didn't hear. Danny, I didn't hear what you were saying.
I'd say if you're going down and you see an obstacle in front of you, like power lines or, some dangerous obstacle, you apply the heat to the burners and you ascend. But to say the bigger the balloon, the bigger the reaction time. So if you're in a descent, you're trying to land in the field, you see power lines. You try to apply the heat in a big balloon like this, it's going to take a long time to respond, and you're going to be more likely to, fly into something you don't want to fly into. Whereas a small balloon, it's going to react immediately. Danny,
I want to read a statement from the Governor Greg Abbott. He issued a statement about the situation there in Lockhart, Texas, saying, Cecilia and I extend our deepest condolences for those who have been affected by today's heartbreaking tragedy. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families, as well as the Lockhart community. The investigation into the cause of this tragic accident will continue. And I ask all of Texas to join us in praying for those lost. Again, that's Governor Abbott of Texas releasing that statement just a short time ago. Mark Rosenker, you're also on the phone with us. I want to ask you, we know that the NTSB and FAA will be looking into this investigation. How does that go down when they're dealing with local officials there on the ground, as well as the state of Texas?
Well, we work very closely with first responders, with the local officials. The people recognize that it is the authority of the NTSB. They will be leading this investigation. Every time I've been out on scene, I've always had tremendous cooperation from all of the state and local officials when we've been investigating accidents.
Okay, Mark Rosenker and Danny Stone, thank you both very much. We're going to continue to monitor this developing story, and we'll have a lot more news ahead in our next hour. You're watching CBSN.